advocate Guo Feixiong, a veteran of Chinese rights defense movement. Mr. Guo was criminally detained on August 8, 2013, which I would note parenthetically is Baba, or Chinese Father's Day, and I know Ms. Yang, would love to be with her father, and yet on that very day, he was taken away by the security apparatus of the Chinese government. We know that he wasn't formally arrested until early September of 2013. Mr. Guo's detention appears to be a reprisal for his support of government transparency and calls for accountability. In recent months, Beijing has cracked down harshly on dozens of similarly minded advocates seeking political reforms. Mr. Guo is not a newcomer to public advocacy, nor to suffering punishments and sacrifice for his work. A former novelist and businessman, he first became widely known in 2005 for organizing protests of land seizures on the outskirts of Guangzhou City. In 2007, a Chinese court sentenced the outspoken Mr. Guo to 5 years imprisonment on charges of illegal publishing. He and his supporters maintained the charges were fabricated to silence him and to silence the others. In late 2011, he was released. Since that time, he's continued to participate in China's rights defense movement. He continued to express himself freely in the hopes of advancing human rights. He has protested, along reporters fighting the Southern Weekly's heavy-handed censorship, and vocally supported recent calls for greater government transparency and an end to corruption. Now Mr. Guo is being held on charges of, quote, assembling a crowd to disrupt order in a public place. This alleged crime, along with many others, is all too often employed unjustly against the courageous men and women who want accountability or are pressing for change. For simply asking for transparency, he is suspected of disrupting the harsh order that Beijing enforces. Notwithstanding China's own criminal procedure rules, authorities have denied Mr. Guo access to a lawyer and have failed to properly notify his family. Once again, China continues to enforce its legal protections haphazardly, if at all, when punishing or silencing those who advocate for reform and change. Today's hearing on the heroism and the sacrifices of Mr. Guo, and that's what we're focusing on. This brave man needs to be lifted up. The United States Congress is focusing and expressing its profound respect for him as well as for his family. Sadly, Mr. Guo is one among many who are suffering in China today. In recent months, Chinese authorities have cracked down on dozens of human rights advocates participating in a so-called New Citizens movement. The movement, which began forming last year, has been described as a loose network of like-minded academics and lawyers who hold informal gatherings and promote various issues, including transparency and anti-corruption efforts. These detentions signifies Chinese citizens' growing resolve and Beijing's growing fears. Mr. Guo and many others throughout China want and deserve change. They want accountability, they want transparency, they want basic human rights and the respect for those rights, and they want justice. And increasingly, they are willing to endure even greater risks and willing to sacrifice their own personal security to speak freely. We are fortunate today to be joined by Ms. Zhang Jing, Mr. Guo's courageous wife, and Ms. Yang Ti Niguao, I hope I said that correctly, his wonderful daughter. We look forward to their testimony, their insights, and their defense of a beloved father and a beloved daughter. We are also blessed to have with us two giants in the human rights field, the Reverend Bob Fu and Mr. Chen Guanjian, who will be speaking to us via Skype. He was supposed to be here personally, but was not feeling well enough to be here. And then we're also joined by Mr. Kumar, himself a political prisoner and suffered for his beliefs so many years ago and has been a frequent, very significant contributor to our efforts on the committee and for the Congress itself. With this current crackdown of Chinese human rights activists, it's important to understand the brave and bold people challenging the Chinese state. And they're doing it in a nonviolent and a benign way, and yet they are harshly retaliated against. Inspiring figures like Mr. Guo puts another heroic face on these detentions. His face, however, does more than just contextualize the current crackdown or add details to a prisoner file. It causes us to wonder about ourselves, about our commitment to human rights, and the risk we are willing to take for those around us and in persecuted countries like the People's Republic of China. Mr. Guo now faces an uncertain punishment, and we must determine our own human rights commitment to him and to others. In July 2013, Mr. Guo wrote about a 1989 Tiananmen activist now facing the possibility of even more prison time. He wrote that Zhao Changqing is an important symbol of the 1989 generation who, in the face of danger, takes action, bears responsibility, persists, pushes forward, and becomes more involved. This is how one should behave and shoulder his fate. Despite the hardships and the odds, Mr. Guo reminds us that we, members of Congress, living in the safe harbors of the West, must shoulder our responsibilities and our burdens, and far too often we don't. We're here today to accept our responsibility to Mr. Guo and other courageous Chinese human rights advocates. We hope that we also, in his words, will take action, bear responsibility, persist, push forward, and evolve like these heroes. He reminds us that is the only way to behave. We hope that the Chinese government is listening. We hope the Chinese citizens seeking change are listening. And we hope Mr. Guo is listening. And we hope President Obama and our administration are listening as well, and will do everything in their power to help free Mr. Guo and others fighting for human rights. We hope the U.S. Congress is listening so that he will be free and be out of that terrible, terrible gulag state. I'd like to now yield to Mr. Stockman for any opening comments he might have.
I want to thank the chairman for putting this together, and as I said to the television cameras, the Chinese government would have greater respect from the people if they respected the people. And the fact that they're continually suppressing their own people, and now it seems that very much, according to independent reports, are increasing the persecution of their own citizens. This is the wrong direction to go. I think prior to the Olympics, they were trying to be more open and more receiving of people's inputs. But since the Olympics, it looks like there's an increase in persecution in China. And we as congressmen need to speak out and support those that are being persecuted. And I thank again the chairman for offering this hearing for us to put a highlight on exactly what's going on in China.
Mr. Stockman, thank you very much. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to have you here. Good to see many of you again. And as we look at this particular case, highlighting this case, I think what the American people need to hear, and quite frankly what the world needs to hear, is the injustice that we see, not only in the case of Mr. Guo, but really in terms of human rights in general in China. I was part of a briefing just the other day as we started to look at the freedom of expression and how the story is not getting told, and it is being subtly and at times not so subtly hidden from the citizens of China and from the rest of the world. According to the World Press Freedom Index, China ranks 173rd out of 179 countries in terms of free press. That's a statistic that is unacceptable for a world leader and for a member of the UN Security Council. And as we see the great reforms that have been promised as part of the 2012 elections, yet we hear today, and we will hear today, how those reforms have yet to take place. And so while these matters may be inherently an internal issue for China, as members of the United States Congress, it's our duty to expose the challenges that the Chinese citizens face and urge the government to implement the necessary reforms. I want to thank the chairman for his unrelenting effort on behalf of people that perhaps have no voice other than his to stand up for human rights, and I'm proud to join him arm in arm to fight that battle. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meadows, thank you very much. We're joined by a member of the China Commission, a distinguished member of the House of Representatives, Mr. Pittenger, who is here because of his deep concern for human rights in China, as well as the rest of the world, and religious freedom in particular. Mr. Pittenger.
the last 30 years. You have been a remarkable leader for the cause of human rights and religious liberties. We gave up a lot in the late 1990s when we gave up most favored trading nation status, and we have no longer had the leverage on human rights and religious liberties. I regret that we did that. There was a lot of business pressure in response to that. But nonetheless, you all have fought a valiant war. I have been over there a number of times, headed back there in January, and would do everything to support your efforts. Very dedicated people who want to present the gospel in a fearless way. So God bless you for your service, and know that there's many here who pray for you and who support you in your work, and only eternity will know the life that you've lived and for what you fought for and what you have given and committed yourself to. Thank you.
Pitcher, thank you so very much for your eloquence, and for all of my colleagues for their steadfast support for fundamental human rights and for being so consistent. It is just so admirable and so encouraging. I'd like to now introduce our distinguished witnesses, beginning first with the wife of Mr. Guo Feixiong. Her name is Yang Jing. She is a political asylee from China. In 2006, after her husband was arrested and badly tortured, she wrote open letters to the President of China and to President Bush to expose the brutality and torture that was happening to her husband. She also called for human rights organizations and the media to recognize and consider Chen Guangzhen's case while he was in jail. She and her husband's activities caused her to endure sustained pressure and persecution, so she came to the United States. She now lives in Mr. Stockman's state, the great state of Texas, and is a full-time university student there. And thank you for being here, and I look forward, along with my colleagues, to your testimony. We'll then hear from Ms. Yang Tianzhou, who is the daughter of Guo Feixiong. She came to the U.S. 4 years ago, is now a high school student in Texas, where she won the President's Educational Award for Outstanding Academic Excellence 2010. She loves music and art. She has drawn pictures of her father and composed a piano piece to express her hope that he can gain freedom in China. And we again thank her for coming forward to speak out in defense of her dad. We'll then hear from Mr. Chen Guangzhen via Skype, who would have been here but was not feeling well enough to travel. As we all know, a valiant Chinese human rights activist who worked on a variety of human rights issues, especially the forced abortion issue. Blind from early age and self-taught in the law, Mr. Chen is frequently described as a barefoot lawyer who advocated for the victims of forced abortion and sterilization and the welfare of the women and the poor and the disabled. He is best known for exposing massive abuses in official family planning policy, often involving violence and forced abortions. Imprisoned unjustly and tortured, first in prison and then under house arrest, he finally escaped house arrest in his rural town in East China, Shandong province, and made it to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. A legendary escape, the kind of stuff that superheroes are made of. The world watched, and after negotiations, he was allowed to come to the U.S. and began a law fellowship at New York University. He recently became a distinguished senior fellow in human rights at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, as well as distinguished visiting fellow at the Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies at the Catholic University of America, and also a senior distinguished advisor at the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. We will then hear from Pastor Bob Fu, who was a leader in the 1989 student democracy movement in Tiananmen Square, and later became a house church pastor and founder along with his wife. In 1996, authorities arrested Pastor Fu and imprisoned them for their work. After their release, they escaped to the United States in 2002, founded China Aid Association. China Aid monitors and reports on religious freedom in China and provides a forum for discussion among experts on religion law and human rights in China. Pastor Fu is frequently interviewed by media outlets around the world. He has an incredible understanding of the Chinese dictatorship, but he also amazingly prays for not just the victims, but also for the tormentors, and loves them both. Absolutely amazing man. We'll then hear from T. Kumar, who is the Amnesty International's Director for international advocacy and a very good friend of this committee. He has testified before the U.S. Congress on numerous occasions to discuss human rights abuses around the world. He has served as a human rights monitor in many Asian countries, as well as in Bosnia, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Sudan, and South Africa. He also served as director of several refugee ships and camps. T. Kumar was a political prisoner for over 5 years in Sri Lanka for his peaceful human rights activities. Amnesty International adopted him as a prisoner of conscience, and now he does that for others, and he does it so well. He started his legal studies in prison and eventually became an attorney at law and devoted his entire practice to defending political prisoners. Ms. Yang, if you could proceed.
尊敬的主席、副主席、各位议员、各位来宾，你们好。
Honorable Chairman, Vice Chairman, Congressman, and everyone here.
我是郭飞雄的妻子张青。
I'm wife of Guo Feixiong. My name is Zhang Qing.
我很感谢今天能有这样的机会，在这里介绍我丈夫郭飞雄的案子。
I'm very thankful to every one of you to have this opportunity to introduce my husband's case to you.
他参加的人权活动，他的理念以及他的性格和人品。
And also, I'm glad to tell you about my husband, about his activities in defending human rights, his ideals, and his personality and character.
今天的中国人权状况进一步的恶化，在今年夏季开始的新一轮的中国官方对中国新公民运动的镇压中，郭飞雄于今年8月8号第4次被拘捕。
And in today's China, actually, human rights has been continued deteriorate. And in the new round of crackdown on the human rights movement, my husband has been detained for the 4th time.
他被控以聚众扰乱公共场所秩序罪。
And the charge is that to motivate people for illegal gathering.
郭飞雄在2013年元月公开发表演讲，呼吁中国的言论自由。
And in 2009, he publicly made the speech demanding for the freedom of expression in China.
他认为，无论是中国还是西方，言论自由是最基本的人权。
He believes that in the West or in East, the freedom of expression is the basic human right.
郭飞雄入狱之后，就没有政府对郭飞雄的案子就没有任何的法律程序。
There has never been any legal due process for my husband's case after he got arrested.
律师和家人都无法见到他。
His lawyers and family members have been denied access to visit him.
至今已经82天，
And it has been 83 days now.
而且看不到何时是尽头。
And we cannot see the end of this case.
如果国际社会不关心这个案子，我们不知道郭飞雄案会有什么样的事情发生，会持续多久。
We don't know how long this will last. We don't know what will happen to him if the international community will not show their concern to this case.
郭飞雄从2003年参加维权运动，2005年4月第一次被拘捕。
And my husband, Guo Feixiong, got involved in the pro-democracy movement in 2003 and got arrested for the first time 2005.
2005年7月，他参与太石城事件，为失去土地的农民说话。
And in 2005, he was speaking out for the farmers who were losing their land because of the government illegal seizure.
2006年，他来到美国参加一个法律会议。
And in 2006, he came to the States to attend a law conference.
当时很多人劝他留下来，
And many people actually advised him to stay in the United States.
但他看到美国的民主自由制度，决心把这些民主自由的思想带给中国人。
But when he looked at the democracy and the freedom in this country, he made the commitment to bring back the ideals for freedom of expression and democracy back to the Chinese people. So he went back.
他明知道他回去会有坐牢的危险，还是义无反顾地回去了。
He was clearly aware of the possibility that he would be arrested again if he would return, but he still made the decision to return.
从2003年参与维权运动至今10年，
It has been 10 years since the year 2003 he got involved in pro-democracy movement.
有5年半的时间是待在监狱里。
He has spent 5 years and a half in jail.
他一直走在民间运动的前沿，
And he has always been at the most frontier fighting for democracy movement.
他不仅是一个行动家，也是一个理论家。
And he is not only promote the theory of democracy movement, but actually he's a doer for this movement.
对中国民间运动有很大的影响力。
He has made a huge impact upon the pro-democracy movement in China.
他写文章40多篇，总结维权工作中的经验。
He has composed more than 40 articles summarizing and thinking about the pro-democracy movement in China.
他的维权活动直接导致他受到当局严重的打压。
And it is because of all his activities that the government now is torturing him in jail.
他4次被关进监狱，
He has been in jail 4 times
受到严酷酷刑，
and has been tortured physically severely.
家人也因此受到牵连迫害。
And even our family members has been tortured as well.
其中最严酷的酷刑是中国警方使用高压电警棍电击男性生殖器，而且制造了这个郭飞雄的冤案5年。
And one of the horrible tortures is that the policeman used electric rod to torture his genitals.
他们想用酷刑打消他的为自由民主奋斗的信念。
And they appealed to this torture to crack down, to crush his will for democracy and for freedom.
但他坚持他的信念。
But he will never change his commitment.
郭飞雄是一个为自由人权奋斗毫不屈服的楷模。
So he will never surrender to such pressure, and he is really, truly a model fighting for democracy and freedom.
他绝食抗议总共超过100天，
And he has been on hunger strike for more than 100 days.
为一代人撑起了底线，被中国民间视为英雄。
And he is regarded highly as a hero by the Chinese society as defending human rights.
2011年9月13号，郭飞雄在服满5年冤狱出狱后，
And 2011, after 5 years being tortured in jail,
他继续从事维权活动，
but he continued his human rights activity,
呼吁中国有言论自由，
asking Chinese government to give back the freedom of expression to the Chinese people.
他也组织参与李旺阳死亡事件真相调查。
And he organized a series of activities for the human rights cases.
他呼吁中国政府批准《公民权利和政治权利公约》。
And he asked the Chinese government to approve the covenant of the human rights, that is the covenant of the United Nations.
要求中国官员公布财产。
And asking Chinese officials to publicly tell public their properties.
在2006年，中国官方对维权运动的镇压和今年对新公民运动的镇压中，
And in 2006 and this year, in the both crackdown of the Chinese government upon the human rights movement,
郭飞雄都是受到最严酷的酷刑。
and my husband Guo was the one that has been tortured mostly
受到最非法的对待，
and has been treated illegally all the time.
所以我今天来到这里，请奥巴马政府、美国国会为郭飞雄案发出呼吁。
So I'm here today to ask Obama administration to speak on my husband's case.
请奥巴马和美国国务院公开提到郭飞雄的名字，公开发表声明支持无罪释放郭飞雄。
I ask Obama administration and American officials to speak openly for my husband and ask the Chinese government to release my husband without any condition.
希望美国国会通过决议案和其他有效方式跟中国方面联系，转达对郭飞雄案的高度关注。
I also appeal to American Congress that within your power, and you can do something for my husband, and to talk to the Chinese government and to express your concern.
推动并支持无罪释放郭飞雄。
And then to ask the Chinese government to release my husband.
希望美国驻华大使、美国总领事馆能够向中国政府当局要求会见郭飞雄。
I also ask American Embassy to China to meet my husband.
因为律师和家人现在都不给见。
Because both lawyers and family members are denied the right to visit him.
美国是世界人权大国，在世界人权领域地位有如灯塔。
And America is the leading country for the human rights in this world. And it serves as like a lighthouse for the whole world.
因此，美国政府、美国总统、美国国会有义务对人权奋斗而遭到打压的中国人权人士郭飞雄以及其他的人给予道义支持。
So the American administration and Congress have the obligation to support those who fight for human rights in China.
同时，也请美国政府、美国国会给中国政府施加压力，来敦促中国政府释放所有的被关押的政治犯、良心犯和宗教犯。
So I also ask American administration and American Congress to talk and put pressure upon Chinese government to release all of those prisoners of consciousness.
感谢。
Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that extraordinarily powerful testimony. And we will follow up. We will do a letter. We will include the entirety of this hearing record to President Obama, to Secretary Kerry, and to Ambassador Gary Locke, our ambassador to the People's Republic of China, and other interested parties within the administration. And we will contact the Chinese ourselves as a committee. So thank you for those very tangible
Thank
follow-up
you.
things for us to do. And I do have other questions later, but now we'll go to Ms. Yang.
Dear Honorable Chairman, members of Congress, and friends, my name is Yang Tianjiao and my American name is Sarah. My dad is Guo Feixiong. I'm here to thank the Congress and Congressman Smith for giving me this opportunity to speak here. The last time I saw my dad was about 7 years ago. It was in 2006, and I was only 10. I remember that he brought me this video game and we play it almost every day during that summer. However, on September the 14th, when I came back from school, he was gone, and I have not seen him since that date. I did not even have a chance to say bye or I love you to him. Over the past 7 years, I have dreamed about him a lot. I dreamed that he would play that video game with me so we can pass level 5 together. But they were only dreams. The next day, I always found myself in tears. I got to know about my dad's condition from my mom's conversation with friends. My mom would not talk about my dad's news in front of me because she thought it was too heavy for a 10-year-old girl to accept. But I still listened to them anyway. And to be honest, they were extremely heavy, sad, and shocking. I heard that he was incarcerated for 5 years. During those 5 years, the government transferred him to many different places and used numerous different torture against him. I was always so deeply hurt when I heard about them. In 2009, we moved to the United States of America. In 2011, my dad got out of jail. The day he was out, we talked on the phone. I literally cried when I heard his voice. I have been longing to hear this voice for 5 years, and I could finally do that. Over the past 2 years, I talked to my dad through Skype. He gave me advice for life, and I showed him my artwork. A few years ago, I drew my dad in this miniature cartoon form, and he immediately complained about the one short leg and one long leg when he saw it. Recently, my art skill have improved so much that he applauded my artwork. However, he still pushes me to move forward. He still wants me to draw like some of the most famous and brilliant artists like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, etc. But the good times did not last long. He was captured again on August the 8th, 2013, and I heard that that day was the Father's Day in China. Again, I do not remember our last conversation. Again, I did not get to say a formal goodbye to him. Again, I have not heard his voice for about 70 days. Again, I miss him so much. Right now, I have a watercolor painting of my dad I finished in September. I'm sorry that I didn't bring it today. I hang it on my wall so I can see his face every day. In this painting, he is smiling. In his memory, that's what he looked like every day when we were together. Also, I composed a piano piece called The Cosmos. This is a piece for my dad. I will always laugh at him when my dad jokes that he fell asleep to my piano playing. However, words, drawings, and music cannot express how much I miss him. My dad is a great man. He is my hero. He has helped so many people. He, a man who pursues democracy, works so hard to improve the law of China. I, his daughter, always want my dad to have the freedom that he works so hard to achieve for others. I always want him to be safe and free. President Obama, you also have 2 daughters. You are also a human rights lawyer. I wish that President Obama can send a request to China to free my father. I do not know what has happened to him in the jail for the past 2 months. I am so worried about his health. So I hope that the Congress would talk to the Chinese government and secure my father's freedom. Thank you very much.
Ms. Yang, thank you so very much for that testimony. And, tears, deeply hurt, and then the water painting where he's smiling on your wall. That is so touching, and I hope that the President, the Vice President, our own leadership here in the House and Senate will act. We certainly will as a subcommittee. We will do everything we can to secure your father's release. And your testimony is so moving. No one can hear that and not be moved. So thank you, you and your mom as well. We do have some difficulties still. Well, we were going to have to switch to audio only, although we'll keep the visual as long as we can to hear the great Chen Quan-chen testify. So I'd like to now yield to Mr. Chen. Hearing no objection that we're just doing it by way of audio, we will proceed.
关城，你可以开始说话了，听得到吗？你想用这个手机讲话吗？
Well, can I just say, Bob Fu will now use his cell phone in a way that he did twice when Mr. Chen was in a hospital under arrest. He couldn't leave, obviously. The hospital room was filled with Chinese police, and Bob Fu got through to him, and that's where he made his famous appeal to come to the United States, and within hours he was given approval. Bob, if you could proceed with that.
有声音的话，那我就换一部电话。我现在用另一部电话给你打过去，好不好？
哦，你现在就可以说了。你要换一部电话是吧？
现在清楚吗？
可以，可以。
可以。
好的，那行，那我打开眼镜头来说。
你要把这个给我们听得清楚一点。不是手机给我。给你。 在这里。
我先把你们声音关掉。2G，这样可以了吗？
好，你说吧。
哎，听到吗？
啊，可以了。
好的。尊敬的主席先生，各位人权议员，各位朋友，大家好。
Dear Honorable Chairman, honorable members of the Human Rights Committee and friends, greetings to all of you. 你说。
10月1日，因践行公民权利而被抓捕的人权勇士郭飞雄先生，已被关押83天了。
Human rights fighter Mr. Guo Feixiong has been detained for 83 days now. 喂，你接着说。喂。
期间，当局再三拖慢，连续8次为主无理拒绝律师会见。
It has been 8 times that the Chinese government has denied his basic rights to see the lawyer.
公然践踏国法，侵犯公民人权。
This is a clear violation of Chinese own laws and citizens' basic civil rights.
郭飞雄出狱，处于生死不知的状态。
We have no idea whether he's alive or he's dead.
05年，郭飞雄、高志胜和我几乎同时遭中共当局迫害。
In 2005, Guo Feixiong, Gao Zhisheng, and I were persecuted by the Chinese government almost at the same time.
如今，高志胜仍在监狱，他人无法会见。
And today, Gao Zhisheng is still in jail, and his family members are forbidden to meet him.
郭飞雄刚出狱不到2年，又被关押，可见中共当权者反法治、反民主人权的决心已定，不应再对其抱有任何幻想。
And Guo Feixiong was arrested again only after he was released less than 2 years ago from his last imprisonment. So today, this Communist Party is showing the whole world it has no idea to change and will continue to fight against the human rights. So we shouldn't have any illusion towards the Chinese Communist Party anymore.
昨天，江西新余的刘平、魏忠平、李思华被开庭，网友戏称是邪恶对正义的审判。
And the trial of Ms. Liu Ping, Mr. Wei Zhongping, and Li Shiguan in Jiangxi yesterday is deemed by the citizens in China as the evil trials against the good.
中共当权者动用全国力量进行网格化围猎，全国各地维权民众遭软禁、被旅游、绑架、关押、劫持、殴打的不计其数。
In the name of social stability maintenance, a number of citizens, petitioners, and activists were kidnapped, tortured, and arrested quite frequently.
6位律师因无法行使辩护权，不得不与刘平等当事人解除委托合同。
The lawyers who were supposed to represent these 3 activists on trial were forced to cancel their legal contract with their clients because they couldn't meet up with their clients.
上周， 对网络自由、言论自由、媒体的审查已经恶贯满盈，延伸到海外了。
The report released by the Freedom House last week shows the crackdown against the freedom of speech, internet freedom, and media censorship in China has already extended beyond China's borders.
这场春天就计划好的新一轮打压，已经抓捕了近150人了。
And this crackdown was actually ironed out since the spring this year, and since then, more than 150 people got arrested.
中共当权者对刘平、魏忠平、李思华的开审是谋实问路，若大家不采取行动，接下来会变本加厉。
And the communist regime is really only using this trial against these 3 activists in Jiangxi as a test to the international community to see how we would respond. And then I believe it will get worse and worse if we don't respond, take proper actions.
郭飞雄第一次被抓，就遭到当局残酷的酷刑。
In his first arrest, Guo Feixiong was tortured severely.
这次又被超期拘押，而不准律师见面，情况非常令人担忧。
So this really should concern and worry everyone this time, because he has been arrested for so long without any legal rights, and his lawyers and family members cannot visit him.
自由属于勇敢的人们，江西这次不得人心的灾情，民众的反应异常强烈。
And the freedom belongs to the brave people. And this illegal trial against these 3 innocent Chinese citizens really occasioned the strongest protest among the Chinese people.
没有制度保障，谁的权利也没有保障。
Nobody's rights will be guaranteed without a sound system.
希望美国、国际社会要帮助中国人民尽快走上民主、自由、宪政的道路。
It is my hope that the United States of America international community will help assist the Chinese people in getting onto the path of freedom, democracy, and constitutionalism as soon as possible.
当务之急是要解决网络自由、表达自由的问题。
And the most urgent task before us is to achieve internet freedom in China.
因为中共当权者是互联网自由的破坏者和自由获取信息的限制者。
And the communist regime right now is undermining internet freedom and restrict the free access of information.
网络审查极其严重，动用大批网管进行审查、屏蔽、删帖等。
And internet censorship is overwhelming, and a large number of internet policemen are hired to censor, block, delete postings online.
这公然违反世界人权宣言的，这公然违反世界人权宣言。
Which is a blatant violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, according to the Article 19.
因为宣言第19条告诉我们，人人有权通过各种媒体不受疆界限制地寻求、接收和传播信息和思想。
This article states that everyone has the right to seek, receive, and import information and ideas through any media, and regardless of frontiers.
希拉里曾明确表明了美国政府的政策，支持 持一个允许全人类平等享有知识和思想的互联网，致力于促进互联网自由。
Hillary Clinton once stated clearly that the policy of the United States is to support an internet that allows every human being equal access to knowledge, to the thoughts, and dedicating itself to the promotion of internet freedom.
若美国的这一政策能够切实执行，那将对中国乃至世界的网络自由起到十分重要的作用。
If this policy of the United States can truly implement it, that will be a great contribution to the freedom in China as well as to the whole world.
因而到了推进为集权国家热爱自由的公民提供援助，推导网络柏林墙的时候了。
So right now, it is a high time we provide assistance to the freedom-loving people in totalitarian countries and tear down the internet version of the Berlin Wall.
建议各个自由国家的立法行政部门加倍增加财政拨款，鼓励研制、开发和分发特网络技术软件，如 FOE 自由门、无键浏览等，都是有效的方法。
Therefore, I suggest to all the Congress and the administration of every free nation to increase the invest in funding and to help develop some software so that we can break through the firewalls such as FOE, FreeGate, or UltraServe, which are all very effective.
目前，美国国会7亿多此项拨款中，使用在为了网络自由上的比例仅有不到3%，因而提高这一拨款的使用迫在眉睫。
I learned that the U.S. Congress has a $700 million budget for this purpose, but only less than 3% is spent on breaking through Chinese firewalls. Therefore, it is very urgent for Congress to increase the budget for the internet freedom in China.
第二，司法和行政部门联合建立对人权迫害者的威慑机制，建立全球迫害人权数据库，包括公共610站和各级地审委站，扩大和建立并严格执行现有的类似禁止俄罗斯侵权官员入境的法案。
And secondly, it is my suggestion that the official, judicial, and administrative organs must join hands in establishing a mechanism for human rights violators, and so that we can stop them, set up a global database of human rights violators, including the 610 office, 610 office of the Chinese Communist Party, and the Family Planning Commission at all levels of the government. Expand, establish, and strictly implement current laws similar to the Magnitsky Act, which prohibits the entrance of Russian human rights violators into the United States.
冻结其在美甚至海外的资产，彻底终结恶劣一边在外享受自由，一边对内实行暴政的历史，如罪大恶极的周永和在国内领导维稳，镇压民众及家人，这在美国购买豪宅，享受自由，逍遥自在。绝大多数公共干部都是如此。
And we need to freeze their assets in the United States and abroad, put an end to the history of those vicious officials when they can enjoy the freedom in overseas, like in America, while they can exercise their tyranny in their home countries. So we need to set up a trans-congregational human rights alliance of free countries and convene regularly and invite civilians, human rights defenders, victims, and their family members, and authorize the agents to share their stories.
第三，建议民主国家政府组建民主国际组织，以推广民主、威慑、制止镇压、捍卫人权等普世价值，建立自由国家跨议会人权联盟，定期举行会议，邀请民间人士和人权人士及受害者或其家人、代理人发出声音。
So the people in the free world, we need to speak up and stand up for all those human rights fighters and to show our concern and to invite them to join hands and fight together.
第四，要求中共停止信仰迫害，尊重宗教自由。
And fourthly, we need to demand the Chinese Communist Party to stop persecuting religious believers and respect their religious freedom.
120多名藏人自焚了啊！新疆的抗暴接连不断遭枪杀，法轮功受到的迫害骇人听闻，世人皆知啊！非官方的独立家庭教会和天主教会仍然受到中共政府的限制、取缔迫害。
120 Tibetan monks have immolated themselves. People in Xinjiang fighting against the tyranny have been shot one after another. And we all know the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, and as well as those underground house church Christians. They are all suffering from persecution.
同样还是这些民族与其他亚洲人、欧洲人、美洲人都能和睦相处，且受人尊重。而为什么你中共是不能容下他们？
All the groups mentioned above, they all can get along with other Asians, Europeans, and Americans and earn their respect. Yet, why can't the Chinese Communist regime tolerate them?
第五，请美国的律师、法律界人士及美国律协等能够为中国的人权律师呼吁，并能联手给他们一些法律的支持和帮助。
Fifthly, I call on lawyers, legal experts of the United States and American Bar Association to advocate for human rights lawyers of China and make joint efforts to provide them with some specific legal support and assistance.
第六，希望每年的美中人权对话要实际关心人权，敢于公开正视。
Sixthly, I hope that the annual U.S.-China Human Rights Dialogue will be practical in advancing human rights and dare to be open and honest.
不应让人权对话由于形式成为人权废话。
Human rights dialogue should not become a matter of formality and empty talk.
最后，呼吁美国民众行动起来，促使你们民选的官员和议员利用各种资源和 国废除一胎化邪恶政策，停止暴力寄生。因为用暴力手段强迫妇女堕胎属于侵犯普世人权的议题，践踏的历史父权、自由选择权，也是神圣的生命权。
And last, I also wanted to appeal to American people, and you voted all those officials, congressmen, into office. So I appeal to you that you will talk to your congressmen and officials and apply all the resources and the means to help terminate China's evil one-child policy and abortion, forced abortion. Because to force women to abort their babies is a violation of universal human rights. It tramples on women's rights, the right of free choice, and also the sacred right of life.
这一邪恶政策使得新生儿的男女比例严重失调。
This wicked policy results in a severe imbalance in gender ratio and a rapidly aging population.
社会迅速老龄化。我恳请善良的人们现在就行动起来。
So I plead earnestly with you, kind-hearted American people, to take actions right away.
用各种方式和你们的议员、官员联系，要求他们和大家一起支持上述人权议题。
And contact your representatives and officials and ask them to show their concern to all the issues as discussed above.
谢谢主席，谢谢各位人权议员和在场的朋友们。
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, all the members of the Human Rights Committee, and thank you, everyone present at this hearing.
Mr. Chen, thank you very much for your eloquent testimony and for your very detailed list of actionable items. I wonder, will you be able to stay with us or will you have to go?
谢谢你刚才给我们这样美好的演说现在我们想问你，你是想离开呢，还是可以继续留下来回答一些问题？
可以。
Yes, I can stay.
Thank you. Then we'll ask questions after our final two distinguished witnesses. Pastor Fu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your years of leadership and support for this very important cause for freedom, not only in China, but also globally, as a voice for those voiceless and for these oppressed people. And today, when I entered into this room, I feel both gladly and sadly. I'm glad that we still have congressional leaders like you, like other members who are still concerned and support this cause, although it's not a popular cause anymore, with the China's economic prosperity and economic stake in the global forum. I'm sad because 4 years after Guo Feixiong's wife and 2 children were able to come to the United States, and we're still talking about Guo Feixiong's freedom. I still remembered in 2009, in a small hotel in Bangkok, I flew there because I heard Miss Zhang Qing with her 2 kids had to escape from China because they could not live a normal life anymore when Guo Feixiong was in prison, was tortured, and the kids could not even find opportunity to get their education. And the wife could not even find a right job for her. And facing the incredible obstacles, including the denial of a refugee status from the United Nations, including a refusal to help by the US government officials. And I already booked my return flight to the United States. And I was willing to continue to file petition or appeal to the UN. But looking at the eyes of these two kids, including Miss Yang, Sarah, who is sitting next to me, full of reluctance and fear, and watching that little boy was playing with me and really begging me to stay with him, to play with him. I just could not leave them behind. Of course, as a friend and a fellow freedom fighter, I would not leave his family members behind by coming back alone. Even that means I have to take what some people called radical procedures between the letter of the law and my own conscience. So I took them to the United States with some extraordinary procedures, which is written in my memoir, God's Double Agent. I was happy to see the family finally need not to worry about what would happen in the middle of the night, what would happen to the two kids when they walk in the darkness on the road to do shopping, what would happen to their dad in the middle of the night when they woke up. Of course, I want to thank many leaders of this country, especially many citizens in the great state of Texas, where I have been residing since 2004. And even today, several members of the business community, religious community, flew all the way from Texas to come here to show their solidarity and their support for the freedom of Guo Feixiong. I want to recognize them. So they are in the midst of this hearing. I want to especially thank Mr. Joe Torres, who is here as the chairman of the board of China Aid, as a business leader, a CPA. Of course, now the tax season is approaching, and we all know this sacrifice he has encountered for engaging the Ministry of China Aid by helping these families like Mr. Guo's family. I want to thank Pastor Chad Bullard, who was former official of Homeland Security Department, now a pastor of 6,000 members church, who came here also to support the family, where the Guo's family are member of that church, the Stonegate Fellowship. I also want to thank Pastor Daniel Stevens on my back, who is my pastor and my fellow co-worker at Mid-Cities Community Church. I still remembered that very day when I heard the mother and children were wandering on the street. That was Gao Zhisheng's family. I wanted to fly there immediately to Bangkok to comfort them, to find a place to stay. But we don't have a budget. So I just emailed Pastor Daniel. I said, could you help? Without hesitation, not a single question even was asked. The next day, I was able to buy the most expensive air tickets, $5,000, to get to Bangkok. That enabled me to meet with these family members and comfort them and situate them in a hotel room. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, since the beginning of this year, the environment for freedom of speech in China has rapidly worsened. The Chinese Communist authorities have launched a campaign across China to strictly purge opinions voiced on the internet and other peaceful public forum. Mr. Guo Feixiong's arrest was just one of the cases of arbitrary arrest. The official propaganda of the Chinese Communists severely criticized the democratic constitutional trends of thought. Besides, the Communist Party also severely suppressed the new civil citizen movement. According to incomplete statistics, from the protest incidents to other peaceful petitioning, at least over 100 people across China, some even respected writers estimated maybe thousands of Chinese citizens have been arrested for simply expressing themselves or for a peaceful petitioning in front of the government. There has been a huge increase in the number of cyber police officers in China. The Golden Shield Project, the so-called Great Firewall of China, strictly shield overseas websites that the Chinese communists think are sensitive. And many netizens have been summoned or detained just because they talk about civil society, the constitutionalism. They gathered in the same city and talk about the word democracy in their QQ chatting forums. And the Chinese government had trained 2 million web moderators or censors to delete posted messages and to, quote, guide public opinion, end quote. Of course, in the past 4 months, the Chinese Communist government have arrested many even public intellectuals, influential even business leaders, such as Yang Xiuyu, Xue Baichun, and Zhou Lubao, and Fu Quansheng, Dong Lijie, who is an environmentalist. So the purpose of this operation by the Chinese Communists is to warn and punish those influential public intellectuals so that the ordinary netizens will not dare to voice their opinions on political and social issues. And furthermore, it seems the Chinese government tried to legalize and legitimize by the court system and the prosecution system all these crackdowns. And there is a joint verdict, a document issued, so-called interpretation on several questions on the applicable law on criminal cases of utilizing the internet for slandering. So nowadays, if the government or any police deemed a citizen who just used the Chinese version of Twitter to forward a message of public knowledge or raising the public awareness, if the forwarding has hit over 5,000 hits, it is called the case of serious circumstances that constitutes the crime of slandering is a crime for prosecution. Of course, there are a number of other arrests in suppressing those people who freely express themselves and peacefully fight for civil rights. And those public intellectuals, such as Dr. Xu Zhiying, such as a billionaire who supports the freedom expression, Mr. Wang Gongquan, such as Yuan Dong, such as Zhang Baocheng, such as Hou Xin, such as Ma Xinli. They were all arrested for simply making their opinion known, without even taking much actions on the street. Of course, at the end of April, Ms. Liu Ping, Wei Zhongping, and Li Sihua of Xinyu City, Jiangxi Province, whose trial was abruptly finished yesterday because of the arbitrary trial, and basically the government assigned all these illegal procedures, and the lawyers have to withdraw themselves. So we have seen this since President Xi Jinping took power. The Chinese government has become more severe in suppressing the rights defenders, restricting the freedom of speech, and controlling the society. Of course, in other areas, like the rule of law, like the religious freedom, have also been worsened. So every day in China, there are thousands of incidents of forced demolition of houses, and every year dozens of millions of people's properties are violated. As a result, there are dozens of millions of petitioners in China. Many of them were forced into the black jail and resulted with numerous occasions of torture and rape of women. And the Chinese Communist government continued to severely suppress the house churches. Of course, since April of this year, there are more Christians who had faced prosecution and received criminal sentence than the combination of the whole year last year. We have that has been happening from Henan province to Inner Mongolia, and the house church Christians were sentenced to from 2 years to 7 years imprisonment for simply organizing a peaceful worship service in their own homes. What has aroused the most concern recently is the incident in which Peking University dismissed Associate Professor Xia Yeliang, which shows the position of the Chinese government in strictly controlling the freedom of speech. Because Professor Xia just promoted freedom, China's reform towards a democratic constitutionalism on the internet. So the Peking University simply dismissed him. So it is sad for us that the status of human rights and rule of law in China is seriously disconcerting. Without human dignity or basic human rights, the modernization of China is worthless. On the contrary, when China is headed toward the opposite direction of universal values, this doubtlessly poses a greater and greater threat to America and to the civilized world. I think when China, instead of suppressing these brave soldiers for freedom, civil society, and democracy, China should embrace them these individuals, like my friend Guo Feixiong, like my friend Gao Zhisheng, like many others who are still sitting in the dark prison, such as Mr. Zhu Yufu, for simply hoping and advancing the very freedom that every human being are cherishing. I think they should be awarded, they should be embraced by the Chinese government, certainly the Chinese people. That will make the 21st century a safer and better and much greater place for us to stay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Fu. I can say, because I remember when you first brought Mr. Guo's family to our attention on the subcommittee and how earnest you were that you would not cease until they were free. It has to be a source of at least some comfort, despite his horrific circumstances that he faces now, that his wife and children are safe. And that is attributable to you. Mr. Kumar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman and the members of the committee. Amnesty International is extremely pleased to be here to testify on this important issue. There are two issues that we have to consider in this. First, there is an individual who has been arrested for his peaceful, non-violent political activism. And the bigger picture is US policy towards China, whether it's moving human rights policy towards China, whether it's moving in the right direction or not. First of all, I would like to urge that my full testimony be part of the record. Thank you very much. Why is Guo Feixiong singled out and imprisoned? There are thousands who have been imprisoned, but in his case, a couple of issues stand up. He fought against corruption. He fought against for transparency. He was part of a major new citizens movement that was fighting for justice and equality in China. He was fighting for media freedom by supporting media workers, press workers, against interference in the editorial policy. He also went to the other step of urging China to sign on to the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights, ratify it. They signed on, but they didn't ratify it. So we are seeing an individual here who has been fighting the fight for the needy and for justice. The results he received was he was arrested, tortured, electric shocks were used, and he was earlier sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now he has been arrested again when he stood up against corruption. This time, for 2 months, more than 2 months, no lawyers or the family members were allowed to see him. So it's basically an arbitrary detention that's taking place there. Despite all these things, what we are seeing from our administration is the pressure that's not up to the standard that we have seen earlier. As previously, one of the member of Congress or the commissioner mentioned that after most favored nation was given to China, the leverage for US have gone. We can say that's one of the major reasons China is not worried about US making statements or speaking up. On this issue, we would like to bring to your attention an opportunity by which US can bring up the pressure in a meaningful way. As you are aware, US and China have two different dialogues going on. One is US-China Human Rights Annual Dialogue, which is, from our perspective, Chinese don't take it seriously. It's like a pro forma. Every year, let's talk, okay, that's it. Nothing happens. There's a serious nature of another dialogue that takes place. that is the economic and security dialogue. Secretary of State attends. That's when Chen was in prison, Secretary Clinton was there for the dialogue. That's why, I mean, the timing was so good that it got a lot of attention. So what we are urging is that Congress should put pressure on the administration to make sure that economic and security dialogue also include human rights. Until and otherwise, human rights become part and parcel of economic and security dialogue. Whatever the US says, it's not going to have any impact on Chinese. So let's see in a practical sense to add this. And as a matter of policy, Secretary of State will be there when human rights is being discussed. They say when we raise the issue with the administration, they say, oh, we discussed the issue on human rights during the economic and security dialogue. So why are you so hesitant to call it economic, security, and human rights dialogue? So we urge strongly that Congress take this as a serious issue and exert pressure and pass resolutions so that next dialogue that takes place, the dialogue is economic, security, and human rights dialogue. That's when Chinese will feel the pinch, because economy and business is tied to human rights, security is tied to human rights there. Hopefully, your action, committee's action, and other actions will bring results to Guo Feixiong's case, but we hope that the bigger picture of having a meaningful way so that US can put pressure to fight for equal justice and for human rights in China also have an impact in China. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Ms. Kumar, thank you very much for that very practical and incisive recommendation. I too have noted that the human rights dialogue has been almost a cordoned off exercise that the Chinese side, does not take seriously, even if the intentions on the US side are very well intentioned. And we're seeing the same thing replicated in Vietnam and elsewhere. It kind of puts it on the sidelines, I should say, and it is not integrated with the security and economic issues. So your point, I think, is extraordinarily well taken. It's worth noting that the US-China, the 18th US-China Human Rights Dialogue took place on July 30th to the 31st, and just a few days later, Mr. Guo was arrested again for the fourth time. So if there was any kind of impact, it certainly was not manifested towards him as a result of the human rights dialogue. So I think your point is extraordinarily well taken. We're joined by Chairman Dana Rohrabacher. Chairman Rohrabacher, you have anything you'd like to, or would you like to ask questions? Or?
Oh, let me just take note. I'm sorry, I have 3 hearings at one time. I just came from a hearing on Afghanistan. And if there's anything that should indicate to us that we should try to have a high standard on human rights, it's the situation we get caught in quagmires in different parts of the world. If the United States stands for human rights, and when we have individuals, brave, heroic individuals like Feixiong, that what we're doing by supporting them is letting them struggle for freedom. It takes a burden off of our shoulders that we have to send our troops everywhere in the world to try to promote the cause of freedom. The fact is that by we supporting local people and their struggles for whatever tyrannical government they're under, that is a way that it helps the people of the United States, because then we no longer have to bear the burden of having to deal with that challenge. And with dictatorships, especially like China, a dictatorship the size of China that abuses its own people obviously has no respect for the rights of other people as well. If China does not respect the rights of its own people to the point it won't murder them or torture them, or as we see with the Falun Gong, where they pick them up by the thousands and throw them into prison and actually murder them for their organs. If you have a government like that over there, that is a threat to all the decent people of the world, because if they'll do that to their own people, what will they do to foreigners? So we who are foreigners to them know that here's a threat of a ghoulish group of people who are willing to commit horrendous crimes against their own people. And our first line of defense is to support those of you who are struggling against that tyranny. And Mr. Chairman, I am very honored always to sit with you and to stand with you and the leadership you've provided on human rights issues. And this, and especially when concerned to China, in which, as we say, if we can bring a liberalization in China and support those people who are struggling to have decent, humane values in China, it will mean a great deal to the security of the United States and the rest of the world. So thank you, and thank those of you who are struggling to help these people in China, and we just want to express unity with you, Mr. Chairman, and with these brave souls who are struggling for a better world.
Chairman Rohrabacher, thank you so very much. I think our distinguished witnesses know that Chairman Rohrabacher, before he became a member of the House from California, was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, and was one of those who put into those speeches some of the most memorable and very enduring concepts concerning fundamental human rights and the freedom agenda. So, and he has continued that ever since as an individual member.
I really, actually, the president was a great writer. I was just sort of
we know
helping
that too. But you wrote it too. Thank you so much. Let me ask a couple of questions, and I'll go to Mr. Meadows. Mr. Chen Guangzhen made 7 very specific recommendations and observations in his testimony, of course, focusing on Mr. Guo and his plight and his deep empathy and concern, which we all share. But on one of those, he talked about the importance of the internet. And I would just note parenthetically that I have introduced and reintroduced several times, which is regrettably opposed by the Obama administration, and that is a bill called the Global Online Freedom Act of 2013, H.R. 491, and Mr. Kumar and Amnesty and Reporters Without Borders and many other organizations, NGOs, have endorsed it and supported it over these many years. Part of the requirements of that legislation is to require internet communication providers that are listed on the U.S. stock exchanges to disclose to the Securities and Exchange Commission their human rights due diligence, and that means Chinese companies like Bandao and others would have to tell us what they're doing vis-a-vis human rights, and if they are, as we know they are, censoring ad nauseum, that too would have to be disclosed. It prohibits the export of hardware or software that can be used for surveillance, tracking, and blocking to government end users in an internet restricting country, a new term that we invent in the bill based on a preponderance of the evidence that they are restricting the internet and surveilling their own people. And there are other provisions as well. Mr. Chen mentioned Hillary Clinton's statement about the internet and allowing all members of the human race equal access to knowledge and thoughts. But this administration opposes the Global Online Freedom Act. And it would give real substance, I believe, to an effort to say, we mean it when we say we want the internet to be free, that students in China and elsewhere, but especially in China and the general public, will have access to an unfettered access to knowledge and information. Secondly, Mr. Chen also mentioned the number of very important points, but one of them was about a Magnitsky type of piece of legislation. I think that is an idea whose time has come, but we already have on the books a law that I wrote in 2000 as part of a larger piece of legislation that I was the author of, called the Admiral Nance Meg Donovan International Relations Act for 2000. And that is to say that anyone who is complicit in the barbaric one-child-per-couple policy, and Chen Guangzhen talks about it as being evil and wicked, which it is. It abuses women. There's no greater abuse of women's rights occurring in the world. And the legislation, which is law on the books right now, that is not being enforced by the Obama administration, and wasn't even enforced well by the Bush administration, says that anybody who was complicit in those crimes is denied a visa to come to the United States. We asked the Congressional Research Service to look into this last year and found that less than 30 people were penalized by visa denial And we know that there are hundreds of thousands throughout China who are visiting this unbelievable agony upon women and destroying children and young babies, especially the girl child, through sex selection abortion. So that is a law that has gone unimplemented by the Obama administration. We will redouble our efforts, as we've done over and over. I asked the administration, what are you doing? Why aren't you implementing it? And we get a big blank stare, but we'll continue to try. But I thank you for raising the Matvitsky, and I think as Mr. Kumar and so many others know, it does work when you hold individuals responsible for crimes in a regime that is called a dictatorship. It has a profound impact. I wrote a law back in 2004 called the Belarus Democracy Act. The mainstay of that law was to hold Lukashenko and his other fellow repressors in Belarus through visa denial, and well over 200 people, it's a small country, have been denied visas to come to the United States, and the Europeans have followed suit. So it is a model, and Matvitsky certainly is working roughly, but it is working vis-a-vis Russia today. So I thank you for those very specific recommendations, Mr. Chen. If there's any further comments, and then I'll go to Mr. Meadows, that any of our distinguished witnesses would like to make, you certainly laid out the case. We will follow this up with a letter to President Obama. We will include all of your testimony. We will ask him. He is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He has gravitas, the likes of which very few people have in the world, to raise these issues. And certainly now with President Xi Jinping moving aggressively in the other direction. It was already bad under his predecessor, President Hu. It has gotten worse, as we all know. So there needs to be, I think, a revisiting of these issues by the administration. And again, Ms. Yang, your comments, everyone should read as well as your moms, should read those comments and say, a mother and daughter testifying on behalf of their husband and dad with such eloquence and such class is so moving. There's so much love coming from you towards your father and your husband. And my hope is that will further motivate all of us who often fall asleep and don't do enough to really make a difference. And our president needs to step up. Our Congress needs to step up, and we need to do much more. And again, Mr. Kumar, I love your idea of the human rights dialogues, well-meaning. They don't work. We need to integrate it into the security and economic. And you're right, the Secretary of State is there, and hopefully Secretary Kerry will take these cases and take them seriously. So I'd like to yield to any of you and then go to Mr. Meadows for any questions you might have. If you wanted to comment on any of that, or I'll go right to Mr. Meadows.
I have one question.
我在9月30号的时候来过这个美国国务院，见过美国国务院的助理国务卿泽雅。
On September the 30th, I paid a visit to the Department of State and visited some officials there.
我当时要求国务院能够公开发表一个声明，提到郭飞雄的名字。呼吁这个支持无罪释放郭飞雄。
So I made the request to the Department of State, asking them to make a public announcement to ask the Chinese government to release Guo Feixiong.
但是很遗憾，我们没有看到他的这个政府发出任何声音为郭飞雄。
But we have not seen anything that has happened.
我非常希望这个政府能够发声。
Yeah, I really hope that the American government can make an announcement.
Could you reveal to us who you spoke to, or would you rather not do that? At Department of State?
Zia, the Undersecretary Zia.
Assistant Secretary of State,
Acting Assistant.
Thank you. So you have reached out to the State Department, and so far, there has not been a response.
Yes.
We will follow up on that as well. And I would say one statement does not make for an intervention. My hope is that, as we do on the China Commission, because I'm the co-chair of the China Commission as well, we have a prisoners list. We advocate for those continuously, for the release of political and religious prisoners, but we don't see a corresponding, I mean, our ambassador, Gary Locke, should be raising this. This should be a mainstay of our dialogue with the Chinese, not what is the next deal to sell more of our bonds or some other self-interest. So thank you for that. Pastor Fu.
I have a quick comment about the follow-up about the improving the U.S.-China human rights dialogue, the mechanism. Although, I mean, within our human rights communities, we basically have concluded with the same conclusion, as Chen Guangchong put it nicely, that the human rights dialogue has become a human rights empty talk. But, you know, I remembered this May when I traveled with Chen Guangchong at the European Parliament, and we met with the EU's highest human rights officer, the former foreign minister for Greece, and he, in a private setting, but he wants us actually to know that when Chen Guangchong was still under house arrest, and one EU diplomat tried to visit him and was beaten up right outside his Dongshigu village. And instead of making public, you know, I mean, it's obviously a diplomatic, you know, a protest is warranted. The EU has waited until the next round of human rights dialogue, the next year, and talked to the Chinese government and said, why did you beat up our diplomat over there? And so we were sort of very, very concerned that actually, you know, that very incident that Chinese sort of guards could beat up a EU sort of one of the most powerful, you know, sovereign country bloc could keep silence of a fellow diplomat who was beaten. So what, you know, after talking with Mr. Chen Guangchong, of course, we were making suggestions to them, and I think it can apply to the U.S.-China human rights dialogue. One way is to avoid becoming a show of empty talks is to make the human rights dialogue live streaming, to make it live broadcast. You know, if they want to talk lies, actually the Chinese talked back to the EU, said, no, Chen Guangchong is free. We didn't beat up your diplomat. He's all right. So I think the reason the Chinese regime can pronounce this blind, I mean, you know, just lies so unshamefully is a closed door, under the table dialogue. If it's you know, broadcast live, even part of the session, when the diplomats are on the same table, when the Chinese people and American people and the world know what we're talking about, and if it's a true dialogue, I think it will produce some fruits, some result. And so that's my comment.
Mr. Fu, thank you very much. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for your testimony. I know it is very easy to get discouraged. The chairman has been fighting this fight for many, many years. But I can speak to his character and to his perseverance, and I can tell you he is unyielding in his efforts to make sure that justice and fairness and compassion is something that we all hold dear, not only here in the United States, but in China and other nations abroad. So I want to give you that encouragement. I am a little little concerned because we continue to have hearings over and over again, and we ask for action items, and we try to take those action items, and then not much happens with them. So, Pastor Fu, let me make sure I understand you. You're saying that once we have these hearings, if we were to televise those live, that they might have some impact in terms of the human rights violations.
That's right.
All right. We were in a hearing with just the other day where we talked about some of the media and how the truth is just not getting out. Not only in China, but it's really not getting out to us as well in terms of what's happening there with regards of media personnel within China. If they report negatively, many times their visas do not get renewed or they get delayed for long periods of time. Would you agree that that is an accurate reflection of what's happening in China?
I would not necessarily agree that is that happens every time or all the time, and actually, as Chairman Smith and the also Congressman Frank Wolf recalled, remember before the Beijing Olympics, I remembered, of course, they are the known so-called critics of China's human rights
Right.
on the record. And when they apply for visas, they slow down a little bit, but still give you visas. And you still were able to get to China, right? I think these are peripheral concerns. I think the main concern, and of course, as a former teacher who used to teach in the Chinese Communist Party school, I think I know the Communist Party's mentality is actually the weaker or the more you yield, the weaker you show to them. Actually, the more they feel they are empowered or more aggressive.
So what you're saying is we need to take a more forceful hand in terms of the penalties of not complying, that we need to set laws, and the Secretary and the State Department needs to be more forceful in terms of the potential consequences.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it is, after all, this is the two great powers, and it's not, nobody wants to have a mutual destruction.
Right.
But at the same time, we can't forget our very fundamental values that founded this country. If by just ignoring or just silencing or put human rights under the table, to marginalizing this very important fundamental issue.
All right, let me ask you perhaps a more difficult question. Do the Chinese people as a whole see us as being critical of human rights, being synonymous with us being critical of them as a national country or their economic? Do they see those as, when we're critical of human rights, being critical of them as a people?
Although the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda machine wants to make the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party,
One and the same.
yeah, with Chinese people, try to mess up the idea. I think the Chinese people can make that distinction, and it is really the Chinese regime who carry out these repressive policies. It is the brutal policies that is used by these torturers who torture Mr. Guo Feixiong, Mr. Gao Zhisheng. So I think the Chinese people can make the distinction. Like even today's hearing, I mean, with the social media and the Chinese internet, there will be millions of Chinese people who will know and who will, even many will find the video.
So what you're saying is that the Chinese people would know that the members of Congress have a warm feeling towards them. We just condemn the action of these human rights violations.
Yeah, not only, of course, warm feelings, but also they know that they are not fighting for freedom alone. They know you are in solidarity. You know,
With
there are
them.
American friends
Okay.
thousands of miles away who are concerned about their prisoners, about their fellow relatives who are arbitrarily arrested.
Okay. Mr. Kumar, let me go to you because in previous testimony, and then I heard it again as a reoccurring theme today, you talked about the need for the State Department primarily to tie the human rights and the economic viability, those together. Obviously, we haven't done a very good job of that to date. We've had a lot of rhetoric, although I do believe the State Department has a sincere desire to affect human rights. It is a balancing act that many times they look at the economic impact versus human rights and trying to evaluate those two. How do we do a better job of tying those two together in terms of, would it be to look at denying visas? Would it be, how can we do that in terms of making a real impact?
Our assessment is that the Chinese government take economic and security dialogue very, very seriously. It's the highest level. Secretary of State from our side and the Foreign Minister of Chinese come together and discuss issues. They discuss economic issues and security issues together. They are tying those together.
Okay.
But they are not tying human rights into that mix. They are having the human rights dialogue separate from that. That's why we are urging that human rights be part and parcel of this economic and security dialogue, not stand alone. When you do it stand alone, they will come, they will talk, but the pinch is not there. They are not getting the pressure. The only way they will take human rights seriously.
So how do we do that? How do we take human rights and make a penalty for not complying? Because the chairman and I have been in meetings with groups from China, part of the Chinese government, and their comment to the chairman and to me was, oh, we're making great progress and that you are just misinformed. Is essentially what they told Chairman Smith, that he was misinformed, that they were making great strides. So how do we tie those two together?
No, the point is, if they have made any strides, of course there are certain areas like death penalty, they have made some improvements. Earlier it was 80% of the world's population, world's executions were taking place in China.
Right.
Until China changed due to a lot of pressure from outside and also inside to make sure that there is another review before someone is getting executed by the Supreme Court. But because of that reason, the death penalty drops to 50%, even though it's still the highest in the world. All the countries put together, it's the highest.
Okay.
The issue of how to make change from US in this case, the only country, by the way, Congressman, that China will take it seriously is the US, the only superpower left, and they want to have good relations with the US. They don't want to burn bridges for something they can do, which is for their own interest, that the US. So our suggestion is that the human rights issues should be tied to these two issues, economic and security issues. Sanction issues are slightly different. It's
right.
When you, every year when they have a dialogue, like earlier it's most favored nations, every year they will have to debate in the Congress, and at that time all kind of human rights issues are debated. Then Congress authorizes it. If the human rights situation goes down, Chinese fears that they may not get that most favored nation status renewed. You know, that's the leverage that was dropped, actually under Clinton administration that was dropped. So the other alternative that we are saying is that there is another dialogue taking place, even though that's no sanction related. The mere fact, the highest levels of US administration, the foreign ministry, that's the Secretary of State, in this case Secretary Kerry will be there raising the issues, not Human Rights Bureau and another Human Rights Bureau. There is one good example we had to see. Chen's case, Chen who testified. Secretary Clinton was there for the economic security dialogue. So happened, the whole issue blew up there. And, your hearings, Chairman, I also testified when he was making appeal on his phone from the hospital bed. That put pressure on Secretary Clinton to have some decision. And so in turn, they exert pressure. And we have seen him released. So what it shows is, if the pressure goes in a meaningful way in the highest levels, then it will have some impact.
So you're saying at the secretary level or the undersecretary level, and just make sure that they're at those high levels?
High level, but the way you tie human rights with economic and security dialogue. That's when they will take it seriously. That's missing. We raised it. Administration is reluctant because they know Chinese will not like it.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me for one more question, if that would be all right. I assume that it is. So, I wanted, one of the understandings that I have is when we have events, whether it be arrest or whether it be rebellion, whether it be a protest, that social media and everything, lights up, it flickers up. And then at that particular time that there is, just an oppressive on the internet freedom, it gets really, there has to be a desire to jump the firewall, so to speak, to allow that message to continue to get out. We heard the other day, or I heard in a briefing the other day, that once we jump the firewall, that many times that they are subject to cyber attacks, almost instantaneously at the same time, again to suppress the freedom of the press or the freedom of speech from sharing that. Would you agree that that is a significant problem, and if we could address that with additional server capacity, would that help the Chinese people share the story? Either one of you, Pastor Fu or...
Yeah, I think the public meeting and also statement mentioning specific names, I think that will really demonstrate true leadership. Like the case of even Chen Guangchong, like Gao Zhisheng. I remembered months ago, with Jared Ganser, the president of Freedom Now, who actually yesterday, had a op-ed at Washington Post. We together met with President Obama's top human rights officer near the White House. And basically, our key demand or key point is, President Obama, he can just basically use his presidential leverage to tell even privately communicate with the Chinese, and in a even face-saving manner, said, look, this is a concern not only to me but to the American people. The torture, the arbitrary arrest, and for Gao Zhisheng, and the fellow Nobel Peace winner Liu Xiaobo, and of course Mr. Guo Feixiong. All these cases, and their family members are here. They are at the door of the White House, and if you don't release them, I will meet with them. And in fact, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and the Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, twice already, I know for a fact, that along with several committee chairmen, including Chairman Smith, write letter to President Obama asking him to meet with Gao's wife.
Right.
Asking him, to meet with Chen Guangchong. And so far, even not a cabinet level member had ever even met with this, their family members. I think the Chinese are watching. The Chinese, of course, are observing, whether that is the priority, whether in the administration.
Well, perhaps we can call on the president's compassion for people and encourage that even today. So, but I thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I appreciate your indulgence.
Mr. Meadows, thank you. Yes,
I want just
Mr.
to
Fu.
correct one record. I think I got to know the acting assistant secretary, Ms. Zaya. she did mention Yang Modong's name last week at China's the UN UPR review in Geneva, and so that is the only name mentioned by any other country. Of course, Chinese ambassador rejected that immediately, so wants to keep that record straight. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we do have votes. Yes, Ms. Yang.
我非常感谢这个史密斯主席今天给我们这个郭飞雄开了一个这个听证会，我很感谢。
I'm very thankful to Chairman Mr. Smith. You gave us this hearing opportunity on my husband's Guo Feixiong's behalf.
我希望这次听证会能够做一些有效的工作，能够帮助郭飞雄的案子。
I hope that this hearing can produce some positive result to help my husband.
希望美国政府和美国国会能够及时的干预这郭飞雄的案子，能够促进郭飞雄尽快自由。
And I hope that the Congress and the administration can work together and for the earlier release of my husband.
Ms. Yang, thank you so much. Again, your bravery and that of your daughter, it just mirrors that of your husband. And it's an inspiration to all of us. You know, we begin every single session of Congress with a prayer. I think it would be most fitting, especially now since the cruelty in China has escalated. It's been bad for so long, and many of you have suffered from it, Pastor Fu. But it would be very appropriate if, Pastor Fu, you could just lead us in a very brief prayer for the freedom of this wonderful husband and father, Gao Zhejiang, and others who are suffering the barbarity of this regime in Beijing. If you could just lead us in that, and that'll be the closing of the hearing.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful opportunity to testify for the truth about freedom, about democracy, about all this brave spirit, that we know that every human being is created with your image, which gives us the true source of dignity and equality and justice. So as we are created equal, and we can seek justice, and justice for all. Lord, we thank you for this great country, a country that has been founded by the founding fathers with this the great constitution, with the guarantee of freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Lord, we cannot take this for granted, because as your servant Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Lord, may you let us to be a voice for this voiceless, because in the end, those victims, those who are silenced, will remember not the words of the enemies, but the silence of their friends. Lord, may you use this panel, use the member of Congress, use the leadership of the great United States of America, and use the leadership of President Obama and the Secretary of State John Kerry to be a vehicle to not only advance the business, trade interests of America, but more importantly, advance the freedom, democracy, and the human dignity, the value of these universal imperatives throughout the world. In the end of the day, we did not live by food and water and worldly entertainment only, but more importantly, we live to glorify you and to love our neighbor and to love each other. May you grant freedom of Guo Feixiong sooner. May you grant freedom of Gao Zhejiang sooner. May you grant freedom of many others summer using ours. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Hearing is adjourned.
我们台的记者想采访你一下。欧盟